Hey, it's Beth. Welcome. This is the 12 months of Christmas challenge. This is something that I started for myself last year just to help me stay accountable to working on Christmas all throughout the year instead of just in the fall. So I have some old papers here. I've been in the mood for vintage, antique-y feeling things lately. So I have this paper that's been in my stash for a while. They are kind of remnants of an old calendar style pad, I think. And it had a little bit of a vintage flair to it. And this is all that I have left. And I don't even have the pad anymore. I think I separated it up. So I may have more left elsewhere in my stash, but this is what I had left together of this. So there's three different pages of the same cut aparts, and then I have these this layout page, and then a couple different other designs, and then one with numbers. So my plan, I don't know that I'm going to be able to work through everything, but my plan today is to at least try and use the cut aparts for some cards. Trying to get some cards made, card sets made to replenish for fall shows. So that is going to be my plan for today, and then we'll see what else of that we can use up in the process. I do start by cutting down the cut aparts, and spoiler alert, I do end up using most of the paper in order to use up all of these cut aparts. I end up tapping into that scrapbook layout style page. And then these, the joy pages, I ended up using both of those for card mats. So I cut one of the cut apart sheets with you on camera and then did the other two off camera. And now I've switched over to cutting apart the papers that I'm going to use for card mats. But first I wanted to harvest these joy labels, and I did want to keep the scallop. I liked that scallop detail, and so I did fussy cut these two remaining ones out. I do one on camera with you and then save you the pain of watching and do the second one off camera. But this, I don't know why, this collection just has a very, not just vintage, but a homespun-y feel to me, homespun. It's just kind of comforting, and it's different. The colors are muted, and the bad thing about working with these types of collection, especially the older ones, is that I don't have a wide variety of embellishments that I can use. So that's why I wanted to make sure that the cut aparts, I utilized as many of those as I could, and I fussy cut out other elements to use as embellishments. And there were three other embellishments in my stash that I felt worked, but I had to definitely kind of age them up, which I do end up inking everything anyway, but so yeah, that's the downside. But it does feel good to use these, and I'm working through enough of these that I'm to the point where I'm oh my gosh, I actually need some more Christmas paper. So I definitely want to invest in some more collections where I have the embellishments that go with it, because I feel like I've done a lot of these lately where I'm struggling to come up with embellishments, and it's not impossible and it's not hard. It just makes the process a little bit longer, a little bit harder. So this project ended up being more than what I bargained for when I started. I think I end up with 32 cards at the end. And I didn't think I would get near that many. So, and then plus, I did bring in some craft cardstock for my base card mat, and I would have used this as my card base, but it's super thin craft cardstock that I'm trying to use up because I can't use it as a card base, and I don't really like the color of it. So I'm using it as like a base mat, but then so like 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and then these like patterned mats I ended up cutting down to 3 3/4 by 5. So you still see craft, and it's enough of the craft to separate the patterns from the white card base, but like you still get a little pop of that white. So yeah, that's kind of my thought process here. And I don't use a lot of craft for the layers. My initial thought was I wanted a layered look, but I wanted it more of like a collage-y style. And I end up, I don't know if I was trying to save time by not adding craft layers or bulk, I don't know, but I ended up spending more time by inking. So that was a process all in itself, but that's kind of like towards the end of the video. So at this point, I've kind of showed you that I went through those cut aparts and I did fussy cut some of them out. Sorry, I was rambling about my craft cardstock at that point, I think. So I fussy cut those down, and because I didn't want them to take up, some of them were so large that if I didn't fussy cut out the image, they would have taken up like the whole card. So I just fussy cut out like the tag or the square with the sentiment on it. So I did do that, and I did that off camera because I did that while I was waiting for my daughter to like finish up an assignment for homeschool. So kind of multitasked there, but I do end up bringing in this red piece. It was a scrap from my stash just because I wanted some more. There wasn't a whole lot of red in the pattern paper that I had left, and sometimes I wanted that pop of red to, highlight one of the cut aparts that I was using. So I do try going back. Sorry, this is a very rambly voiceover today for some reason, but I do try to use up some of the scrap pieces I have for layering, like along with the cut aparts, and then here I end up tapping into more of that scrapbook page because I wanted a border behind the joy, and I realized that strip had the border, and I didn't even have to go find some more paper that would work. So, and then like here, just layering the cut aparts with some of the green pattern scraps that I had, was just trying to use up the scraps as I went. And just to explain this process, I figured out like the layout of all of my cards before I adhered anything down. And I tend to do this when I'm bulk card making just because I want to make sure I don't get to the end and then have like nothing but pattern paper left or nothing but embellishments left. So it's just kind of a way for me to make sure that I'm spreading all of the goods out evenly across all of my cards. And that's just from experience. I tend to like use up all the good stuff at the beginning if I start gluing it all down and then realize I get to the end and I don't really like anything that's left, or don't have much left. So I do like kind of lay everything out on the mat and then set it aside, and then we'll come back in after I do all of my inking, and then we will adhere everything to card mats. And I do at that point, when I start adhering things together, do bring in some additional pieces as embellishments, whether it's like little fishtail banners or punched circles or additional strips, things like that. So, and here I was excited that I was even able to use one of the journaling cards. I just covered up the journaling part with that little calendar that I cut off the scrapbook page, and was able to use that with the candy cane that's on the right-hand side for kind of a focal point. So that was kind of a nice surprise. I thought I had a handful of those journaling cards that I was just going to save for scrapbooking sometime in the future. So at this point, I think I have used up all of the cut aparts, and so then I'm going into the scraps of the pattern paper I have left. I had some die cut trees that were a green that worked, and then those candy canes and ornament, the red and green matched the tones of the pattern paper, but obviously like the bright white will doesn't necessarily work, so that'll go away whenever I do my inking. But and then here on these last few cards, I'm just trying to piece together some of the scraps to make card fronts. So in the end, I had a good part of one of the Santa patterns papers left. I think I used part of it, but I probably have like 3/4 of a sheet left of that, just because it didn't work great. Like I had a hard time using it with those other patterns. And then I had that sheet with the numbers on it, which I have a plan for going forward. I just don't have all the supplies to do that project yet. So I rambled on long enough to get to the point where I'm inking all the edges, and I'm just using the walnut stain, distress ink, and a blender, and do a combination of, either putting it down flat and inking around the edge, kind of blending in around the edges. Sometimes I want it to be darker, like on these darker patterns or darker mats, and so I do pick it up and like ink the edges like I would if I were, I don't know, using a sponge or something. But so I think I go through like one set of card fronts with you inking, but then I don't make you watch me go through all the other pieces, because like I said, that did take a good while. But I'm glad I did it, because one, it kind of just brought in more of that aged feel, but then two, because I wasn't using mats between all of my layers, it kind of helped separate things and help things stand out a little bit more. And then anytime that there was any white showing, it kind of helped tone that down too. So this is an example of where I realized after inking that I did want to add something else to this particular card front. So I punched a bunch of little tiny, I think 3/8 inch circles out of the scraps from one of the cut aparts that I fussy cut, and inked those. Tried to use them on this card, realized they weren't going to work, but I set them aside and do end up using them later. I just realized that this card needed something a little more, so this is where I pull in some fishtails. So after I get everything inked, I do adhere them together like on the pattern paper mat, and then sometimes I almost forget, but I do then adhere everything to the craft cardstock mat, and then adhere that to my card base. And at the end, whatever was left, I do use up any of the last usable scraps, like smaller scraps that I had, and put those on the inside of the card. I don't show you that, but I did do that. So I think I've explained everything I need to explain. At this point, you can kind of relax and watch my process or craft along with me, and I will stop babbling and set you to some music, and then touch base with you at the end when I show you all of my finished cards. So in the end, I had over 30 cards, and those that I made multiples of, I will take one from each of those sets and bundle them together into a pack of like assorted design Christmas cards and sell those at my shows. Pricing wise, I don't know. I haven't really thought that far ahead yet, but at least I will have like 3 of the same set. So sometimes it's nice to have backups if one, like if they sell, then at least I can, or sometimes people will ask if I have more of that design. So anyway, those will go for sale, and then probably some of those other extra ones that I made will go into my donation stash. But if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. This was kind of it was a rambly video at the start and just kind of a long process. Hopefully you got something out of it. And if you had a favorite card, let me know. I think one of mine was the Joy cards, like with the scalloped oval that had joy. And then the one with the presents, I liked that one as well. But also, I think I forgot to mention, check out Kathy over on Instagram. She will be linked in the description box below. She plays along with me most months, so you can see what kind of Christmas projects she made. But other than that, I thank you guys so very much for your time, and I hope you all have a very crafty day.